Today, I'm really excited because we're talking about how to be strategic. There is an article that I love to share about, and it's specific for women in tech, but I think it applies for a lot of us, where we can be viewed as very tactical. We're really good at getting everything done, at all of the moving pieces. And as a result, perhaps this, combined with many other things, could actually lead us to be overlooked for higher level positions because we aren't viewed as strategic thinkers. Now, that could be considered a controversial point from where you're coming from. It could very well be open for discussion, and I'd love your feedback on it. So if you're watching right now, go ahead and let us know if you're watching the live stream. If you're watching later, hit hashtag replay so we can make sure to follow up. And as we all learned this week, Facebook can go away. It can go away for a few hours and we still survive. We still are here. The world keeps turning. So maybe you want to get in on the Zoom sessions rather than just watching over Facebook. And if you do, reach out to Janessa. But for today, we're talking about how to perhaps even begin thinking strategically. Some of us do this and automatically do it. And I'd encourage even those of us that do it that way, that are sort of automatically always playing through various scenarios in our heads and understanding where what we are doing fits in the larger context and what downstream activities might be impacted. Even if you're already doing that, I'd encourage you to dedicate some time to plan to think strategically. So why is it important to dedicate some time? Even if you're already more of a strategic thinker, if you dedicate some time to strategically think and you put that time block on your calendar, you will get more adept at thinking strategically. And what you do day in and day out already will be enhanced. For those of you that are like, I don't know that I strategically think, or maybe I do occasionally, but I'm not often committed to doing this. This is the type of practice that can help you grow in that realm and thus also help improve your leadership at whatever level you are at. So to begin with, and this goes back to something I talk about a lot, you need to block some time to do this. Blocking it on your calendar gives you a better chance, especially if you adhere to your calendar blocks, of getting something done. And in order to get yourself into the headspace of brainstorming and thinking strategically, you should allow yourself at least an hour. So in the event that you're like, maybe I can give up an hour once a month, then do that. If you can give up an hour once a week, that's amazing. Maybe it's an hour once every 2 weeks. Maybe you put it on your calendar for every week, but it's something that you'll move 1 or 2 of a month, but never more than 2, right? So that you at least get 2 sessions in. Think about what you want to do and how you want to start, and know that the more frequently you actively practice this, the easier it will get for you to actually be doing it on the fly. And then you might even find yourself down the line in a type of flow where you're automatically doing this and you actually don't need to dedicate this time. But because you've dedicated this time, you've elevated your level of thinking. So I'm just going to take a pause here and see if there's any questions about how we should be blocking time to strategically think.
I think that's a good suggestion. I'm becoming more and more fond of having dedicated time for things so that they can get done. I think I used to do it a lot more, in the corporate world, but I don't do it enough for other things that are more specific to me or like my future and things like that. So that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a great point. I was coming into this talking specifically about strategic thinking in the corporate work world, right? And you might also want to block time to strategically think about what changes you are making, what you're working on, where you want to go, how all of that fits in. So you might also need to be blocking some time for personal strategic thinking.
Yeah, I think I read your comments more in the framework of for ourselves.
Yeah.
At work, I think I had more opportunities and they were maybe set up also for me. Like there was an actual time, not only just by myself, but with the team to do that,
Yes.
which is dedicated.
Mhm.
But I never took that learning into sort of like my private world.
Right. And I think that there's a lot of value for teams to think strategically. And that being said, I also think it's important. So if we, if we're reverting back to, not reverting, but going back to focusing on the corporate environment, it's also critical that we individually think about this and will bring more value to those team discussions. So even if you're in situations where you have a team that meets and really is strategically thinking, you still should block time to do this individually. I view this very much as an individual and collaborative activity. And when we start talking about what we're thinking about and what you're brainstorming about, how to do it, because some people are even like, how do I even begin thinking strategically? Like what do I need to ask myself? So let's just jump right into that. And then, we can ask if there are any additional questions. So the first thing to think about from my perspective, I like to try and start at the beginning and just sort of continue to let the path unfold. But depending on where you are, what you're working on, is saying to yourself, thinking to yourself, and writing down, right? So there's a lot of data out there that shows that if we are actually physically writing things out, we're engaging more of our brain than even if we're typing, and much more than if we're just sitting there thinking. So there's a lot of value in writing this out, even if you're just going to shred it right after. Okay. So be prepared to be at a place where you can sit quietly, to think, to write this out, and ask yourself, what does this thing, and you answer the question about what this thing is. Is it a project? Is it a client? Is it a overarching plan? What does this thing, or how does this thing fit into the bigger picture? Write out how this thing fits into the bigger picture and start allowing yourself and your brain to engage and start to understand and more deeply know how whatever you're working on fits into the bigger picture. Okay. So say you are a project manager and you're responsible for 2 or 3 plans. Start with one of your plans, one of your projects, and sit there and brainstorm. How does project A fit into the bigger picture? The bigger picture for the organization, the bigger picture for my team, the bigger picture for my career, the bigger picture for you. Keep going, stakeholders, investors. Keep going and brainstorming to see how project A in that situation fits into the bigger picture. Do the same for your other 2 projects. You might find that maybe you've got 3 different projects that you're working on, and one of them really, after brainstorming, is much lower priority. Maybe the organization hasn't even necessarily deprioritized it, but when you're strategically thinking about it, you recognize that it is of less importance. These are the insights that only come from giving yourself that time to really sit and think. So that's the first question you start with, is how does this thing, again, you have to enter in whatever this thing is, this project, this client, this plan, how does it fit into the larger picture? And start exploring and testing the boundary lines of what the bigger picture is. You may be thinking about the bigger picture from a client standpoint. Maybe you should also be thinking about it from a regulatory standpoint. How about from an industry standpoint? What do you know about competitive intelligence? Where else might you go from here? These are the questions that should be coming up and bubbling up as you are allowing yourself, and perhaps even forcing yourself, to sit in thought about your thing, your project, your whatever, and where it fits in the bigger picture. So I'm going to pause there and just see if there are any questions about that sort of really basic but important starting point. All right, nothing so far?
Thanks. Yeah, following along.
Okay. And from there, I would write out who, what, when, why, where, and how. And start asking yourself questions about that. Like, so if you go with who, who else should I be consulting with about that? And Elisa, that's where, if you have a team already set that's doing strategic thinking, some of those people might be in that who, or you might also need to be consulting or questioning or exploring with other people that are not in that just set group. So really think about who else you might be able to call upon or interview or ask questions about to get a better, more conceptualized, larger picture view of what you're exploring and what you're strategically thinking about. So who, what else do you need to know? What else do you need to read? What else do you need to learn? What else are you not yet thinking of? The questions with what could be endless. Same with who. You may come up with your own who questions. So who, what, when do you need to share this information? When do you need to have clearer information? When do you need to put into place an escalation plan if something is not going according to plan because you're looking at it in terms of the larger picture? So who, what, when, where does this thing that you're examining, does this strategic planning that you're doing right now, where does this fit into the larger picture? Is there someone you should be consulting with about it? Is this something, where do you go with this information? Do you go to the study teams? Do you go to get more information from them? Do you go to the clients? Is it time to put out some surveys from your clients to find out more information? Where do you go with the information that you are coming up with and exploring so that you can, again, continue to raise the bar and continue to think, where does this thinking go from here? Who, what, when, where, why? Why are these things important? The why is so intrinsically built into the need to strategically think that you should really be asking yourself why throughout. Like, even if you are about to dismiss the calendar reminder that says you have this hour block of time to think strategically. Well, why would you dismiss that? This is your chance to really get deep with your project. And chances are that tactical stuff, that stuff that we very often get bogged down in, actually needs to be put to the side so that you can do the strategic thinking so that the tactical execution of whatever you're working on is far more effective. So why are you doing this? Why does this particular thing, again, project, plan, whatever, client, why does this fit into the bigger picture? Why is this the priority, or why isn't this the priority? Why? Don't hesitate to ask yourself why. And then how? How do you take this information and translate it into something actionable? How do you continue to expand your ability to brainstorm and to think strategically? How do you communicate in a way that's effective with others what you've thought through? One hesitation or one caution that I want to put out is that there are times that I've worked with people and I've started to help train them on this way of thinking, on giving yourself this time to really dig deep and to get into strategic thinking. And it can be hard not to come up with an idea and immediately want to send an email or immediately want to reach out to someone and actually eat into your 1 hour block of time, right? That you've got chunked out. Don't do that. Keep all of this written down, look at action steps, give yourself that full hour to think through it and process it. And when you give your mind this time to really dive deep, you're going to be coming up with things that you haven't previously had a chance to really explore. Chances are they've always been there, sort of on the peripheral of your knowledge about this particular what, whatever that what is, again, your project, your plan, your client, whatever. there are going to be things that it's almost like coming home. You're like, oh yeah, I knew I wanted to learn more about this, or I wanted to dig into this a bit more. But when you give your mind a chance to do it, it relieves a lot of the burden of kind of keeping that suppressed so that you can focus on all of the tactical stuff. But you will also have this instinct, chances are, to start the outreach, to start sharing, like, oh my gosh, I was thinking through this and we've got XYZ problems. Hold off, slow down, get all of this out, right? Give yourself that full hour and then think through specifically what your action steps are. And one of your action steps might be just to give yourself 24 hours. Now that you've gotten all this stuff out, give yourself the 24 hours or 48 or through a week to just let it percolate. You will figure out and know the best way to then take your strategic thinking and begin to operationalize it. You do not want to strategically think and then be reactionary about what you've been thinking about, right? You want to be very considerate and very responsive in a positive way with everything that you've been thinking about. So I know that this can feel somewhat just high level and contextual without a specific situation. I'd love to open it up and see if anybody has something that they're working on right now that they'd like some coaching on, how they would begin thinking strategically about it, how they would really dedicate time. And then from there, what they'd be asking themselves. All right, Janessa, nothing's coming in over Facebook right now?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. All right. Melissa, Lisa, any questions? Do you have anything that you'd like to say? This is a project I'm working on. I'd love to explore how to think a little strategically about that.
Not a specific project per se. I was just talking to like a recruiter this morning, and I was talking about trying to think strategically about kind of like my career and the fact that I would like eventually to be able to serve on advisory boards and board of directors type of boards. And I was trying to strategize with him, and I realized that I kind of need to sit down and do sort of like go through this exercise and understand it a little bit more and do all this kind of like planning in a way that is really like, how do you get to the finish line? So that's kind of maybe my most recent example from like today.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful example. And, in that situation, I encourage you to really start with the why. Like, why do you want to do that? Why does that fit into your bigger picture? And that will not only help inform you of what the path is, but also what specific boards you're going to want to be considered and sitting on, right? Because it's not just any old board. There's very certain boards that you'd want to be a member of. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. That's great. No, I think that you should block an hour for this and give yourself that time to start to dig in, because it will really inform your plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Melissa, is there any project that you're working on right now that you'd love to start thinking or continue thinking more strategically about?
Yeah, so I'm looking at potentially transitioning from my current role, my current position, into something completely different, and it's got a couple different facets to it. So right now I'm in the stage where I'm trying to just understand current state, desired state, and kind of draw a line between the two. Any kind of advice for how to get started there?
I think you've got it, right? First, you got to make the time to do it, and you've got to make enough time that you're not just willy-nilly adding things to the list, but you're really giving your brain some time to dig into it and get started. But understanding current state and desired state, and then the gap between, really is a matter of just getting that down, and that's so individualistic to each of us, right? This is actually where I am right now. Be brutally honest with yourself, right? Are you and I'm making this up, but like, are you feeling an undue amount of stress because you actually are not putting into place boundaries? Well, then your desired state of feeling less stress can't be achieved just by switching jobs, right? You need to do some self-work. So there's an example of really digging deep into what the current state and the desired state is and why there's a gap, right? Whereas sometimes we end up in situations, and I'll use that same exact example, where our current state is highly stressed and our desired state is not to live in a state of stress. And we know because of the people that we're working with that no matter how good our boundaries are, it's not going to be good enough. And that's very informative, right? So then maybe changing positions is the course of action, right? So definitely understanding current state and desired state, really important. If we can bring it to like the strategic thinking and planning to think strategically from a corporate level. Let's say you are heading up the launch of a new product and you know why this product is being launched. You know the data behind it. You know the importance of it. Well, what else conceptually do you know in terms of the bigger picture, right? Like, what do you know about the markets globally? What do you know about the strategy to roll out in various markets? What do you know about the competitors in each market? What do you know about how this product fits into the pipeline of the company as a whole? What is going to, what of what you do is going to inform other things, right? What of what you do impacts X, Y, and Z department? Really, that's an example of taking a product launch and really digging deep. And a lot of this work is going to be there on the surface, but it's only through taking the time with it that you're going to get into those more nuanced strategic decisions or strategic options that may not appear, but that when the time comes in a discussion with others, or when the time comes in your planning, you're going to need to call upon those strategic options. So the more time that you give yourself to be brainstorming that, to be thinking through that, the easier it's going to be to have these cards at the ready when you need to employ them.
I think just to kind of piggyback on that, if I can, one of the things that I sometimes struggle with is categorizing like tasks that I find that are involved with it. So some things are important. Like we know they have to get done. Other things are urgent. They just need to get done now. And sometimes I find those two things sort of fighting for my time.
Yeah.
When that happens, like, how do we kind of fit that? How do you see that fitting into the strategy so we can get past those moments?
Right. Well, I think so often women actually don't, and I'm talking about specifically women, but anybody, I think that this is a skill that is not emphasized enough as we are bringing people through or up the ladder, right? The importance of critically thinking. We don't just want people that execute. So it's very important to remember that busyness is a choice, right? And it is critical that we are constantly triaging, and something might come across your desk that's urgent, but you have this hour blocked to be strategically thinking. Is that urgent thing really urgent in the next hour? Or can you adhere to your calendar and then you've got an opening and you take it for that urgent thing? Recognizing that we need to triage consistently is very important. And recognizing the difference between urgent and important is also critical. And what's important to you might not be to somebody, or rather, you might find something not important that somebody has brought to your attention and they're feeling it's urgent and important. Recognizing where other people are coming from and helping to bridge that gap and sharing with them perhaps, why it's urgent, but it's not important in the next hour to you is really important in your communication, right? Making sure people are understanding where you're coming from, understanding where they're coming from is the first step in that, so that then you can help them bridge that gap and then communicating that. So really practicing that day in and day out, knowing that busy is not the same as accomplished and that important is not the same as urgent, not always. hope that helped.